Hi everyone, welcome back to the Property Finance Podcast, and today I want to talk about why the QS isn't your friend, and especially if it's the lender's QS as well, which it inevitably always will be. So what happens on development finance, and it's going to be a relatively quick episode, but what happens on development finance is your lender will assign a quantity surveyor, and their one and only job is to check over your build costs and to report back to the lender how much it would cost for the lender to build out that site if you weren't in the picture. No matter what figure you put down, the QS is always going to come up with their own figure. They will sense check your numbers. So if I talk through an example that we've had recently, so we're working with a developer at the moment. His build costs were bloody good. Very, very conservative, good contingencies, everything else. They came to about 700 grand for a couple of units. So decent build costs. The QS looked at those build costs and they said, your build costs are perfect. We have no issues with your build costs whatsoever. We believe that you can deliver that for that price. Great, wonderful. Client's absolutely buzzing. He thinks he's made a friend for life. He thinks he's got the best QS since sliced bread. The QS report then comes back in and they report the build costs at 800 grand. It's a 100 grand increase. Now, the reason behind that is because although they trust the client's numbers, and although they say the client's numbers are great and that everything is perfect, and they're really, really behind the fact that this client can deliver this project for this amount, he is the main contractor. Their issue is that they need to work on the basis that if the lender repossesses, the lender would then have to bring in a main contractor. They would then have to instruct the build, and that main contractor is obviously going to have profits, everything else. So the QS believes that to bring in a main contractor would be 800 grand cost to this lender. Now, the issue you have in this little love triangle is the lender has to play middleman to the client and the QS. They have to take a view to a certain degree of, right, okay, well, it's going to cost us 800 grand to build it if we repossess. The client needs 700 grand to build it out. Where do we stand? Now, most lenders are going to side with the QS. They're going to say, well, based on that, we're going to have to lend 800 grand of build costs because we have to be protected if the loan falls into default. The problem you then have is that 100 grand extra that they're lending on the build costs has to come off another column. Naturally, it comes off your purchase column. That's the only column that it can come off of. So where you thought you had a decent contribution towards the purchase, that then drops off because they've had to increase the build costs. So when you're dealing with the QS, you have to have a certain degree of kind of reservation, if you like, of no matter what I put forward to the QS, he's inevitably going to come back and mess with those numbers, especially if you're playing the part of the main contractor. If you are coming in and you are bringing in a separate main contractor, things are slightly better because if you've got a main contractor on board, the QS could agree with those numbers. And because obviously from their perspective, they're going to look at it and say, well, actually, we need a main contractor. You've got a main contractor. The lender could use that main contractor if needs be. So they could agree with those numbers. But when we're talking about the QS not being your friend, I think what you need to remember as if you are coming in as the main contractor yourself, you need to remember that they are employed by the lender. They are only interested in looking after the lender. They are not interested in looking after you at all. Their client is the lender. Their insurance is for the lender. So everything is for the lender's benefit. Now, where we can kind of pivot around that is I mentioned earlier about this little love triangle and the lender kind of having to play middleman is we will try and aim towards development finance lenders who can take a view on that because not every lender is going to side with the QS. We've got one at the moment where the lender is a pretty big lender. They're pretty well known, due on the podcast soon, hopefully. But they're a good sized lender. They work with a lot of guys who you see on Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. Now, they will take a view because they obviously look at the QS numbers. They say, right, okay, well, the QS thinks it's going to cost us 800 grand to build it out. Client's saying 700 grand. We can meet them in the middle. We could obviously go off the client's numbers and take the risk that something happens. It's all about that relationship. Now, it comes back to the funding triangle again as well, because if you've got a client who's got and the funding triangle being experience, cash, assets. If you've got a client who's got experience, cash, and assets, the lender is going to look at that and they're going to say, well, they've got the experience of building out at this pound a square foot. They've got the cash if there's a build cost overrun or if there's a shortfall of funds. They've got the assets if something goes horrifically wrong and we have to repossess and look at PGs. So from a lender's perspective, if they can see that funding triangle and you're hitting all three of those points, they're more likely to side with you. Now, if you're looking at that funding triangle and you're saying, well, actually, we don't have the experience, so can they really build out for that? They don't necessarily have the cash to cover cost overruns or shortfalls or anything like that, and they don't have the assets for like a PG to be backed, then again, potentially the risk you're going to have is that the lender is then going to side with the QS. So every deal is going to be completely different. The QS isn't your friend, the valuer isn't your friend, the lender isn't your friend. But if you can present yourself as investable by hitting that triangle, then realistically you could start to get these people siding with you. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully it kind of gives you a bit of knowledge as to how lenders and QSs and everything else work, especially if you're kind of new to developments. But yeah, if you can hit that triangle, you should be pretty okay. And even if you can hit a couple of points of those triangles, you'll normally be okay. But hopefully it gives you a bit of knowledge as to sort of what to look out for. If you found it helpful, like, share, subscribe, comment, review, do anything you can. Get the podcast out to as many people as we can. And yeah, hopefully you found it helpful, and I'll catch you on the next one.